In this series of videos, what we're going to do is create this page. And the idea behind this is that we are going to review this floating. So we have our nice images floating both sides. We'll also have a little review of class and IDs. And then we're going to talk about something called the box model, which is going to give us all these nice margins and spacing between all of the different elements. So this is the goal, the end goal. Let's get started. All right, so I'm going to set this aside just to remember, give ourselves a target here. So here I have just a basic starting page where I have two sections, two semantic tags, two section tags. And in my section tags, pretty much just copied and paste from one to the other. I have an H2, which is giving me puppies. We might do a different puppies here, but the point is that we have two sections. We have two different images. We have I have an empty P tag, which I'm going to fill in a minute. And I have this clear float thing. I wonder what that's all about. Well, I'll try and show you that in a minute. All right, so let's do a little cleanup, a little editor, what's the right word? Help. I'll use that word. All right. So the first thing I'm going to bring to your attention is right down here, I have this validator. So you can either go into the validator in the browser, or this one has one inherent inside of the browser, inside of the editor. So if you go into your settings, File, Settings, and you click on Install, because I've already got mine installed, so that's why mine is in Packages, and you search for this W3c Validation and install that, that'll be a nice little tool, so as you're typing, it's automatically going to be validating for you as you go. So if I put a section tag out of place, for example, I'm going to put it down here, which would be very wrong. It's giving me it right away. It's saying, that's not where that's supposed to go, and it's on line 27 where I see the error. So it's nice to have that built in. Okay, so that's one feature. Let's see if I can Control Z that back. There we go. All right, so now I'm clear. So on my browser page, you'll notice that I have a bunch of text, but I'm not accommodating for that here in my index page. So I'm going to show you how to create that text. In other words, this is not the most current version of what I have going on here. I want you to see all this text, and I'll explain what I just meant by that. We have this lorem ipsum text, and the idea behind lorem ipsum is it's just filler text. It's a way for us as the developers to fill in some content when we don't have content from the client, for example. So we just want to fill in some placeholder text for display, for visual. So when I refresh my page, because I don't have any lorem ipsum text here in these paragraphs, this is going to disappear, because this is what this page really looks like. But how do you put in that lorem ipsum text? Well, the nice thing is in your browser, so I'm going to go to these empty paragraphs here, and I'm going to type in LOREM, and then I'm going to give it a number, and the number is how many words do I automatically want to generate? 50, 200, 25, 5, whatever. So I'm going to do a 50, and I'm going to hit Tab. And what you'll see is, when I refresh the page, now I have 50 words of lorem ipsum text, just filler text. So I'm going to do that in this one as well. Lorem 50 and Tab. And so now when I refresh this page again, I should just have some filler text. All right, another editor thing that would be very helpful is oftentimes we have all of this code that extends on the same line farther than our screen reaches. And so we use this scroll bar to scroll back and forth, which may be okay, but it may be kind of frustrating. So know that if you go up to View and you select this toggle soft wrap, that gives you the ability to sort of do this word wrap, so it all is contained within the width of your editor. All right, so now let's do some floating. Let's float this text around our images. So I'm going to go to my style sheet and recognize that in my section I have given this image a class of left and this image a class of right, because I want to separate them so that I can float this image to the left and this one to the right. So if I create a class of left, that floats everything to the left, and et cetera, et cetera. So remember, to get a class, to select a class, we use the period. And I'm going to do left because that's the class name I'm trying to grab onto. And then open and close curly braces. And we're going to do float left. Okay, let's see what happens. All right, so that text is floating around here to the left. This is interesting, but we'll deal with that in a minute. And then we'll float this image to the right. So remember, anytime you want to float something, the thing that's going to be floated around goes first, and whatever is going to float around it goes next. So I have those in that particular order on purpose. So now I can do a, right, open and close curly braces, and we're going to float this one to the right. Spelled right, spell right. There we go. All right, and so now when we refresh the page, that is in fact what's happening. I don't know what's going on here, but we're going to deal with that in a minute. All right, so let's just for clarity, I'm going to put some borders around the section. So that'll help demonstrate why that puppies is pushed up against this left corner when it's in a section and we don't want it. We want it separated. That's the whole point of a section. So let's do a border. Let's do 2 pixels, black and solid. And we'll see that on this page. So here's what happens when you start doing floats. Once the float, you ask something to be floated. In other words, we've asked the image to float to the left, or we've asked the image to float to the right. What's strange is that the browser is no longer really aware of the height or the size of that particular floated element. And so what's happening here is that we have an image that is floated to the left, but the section is only going to be as big as the content that it's aware of. It's aware of the H2 and it's aware of the paragraph, but it's really not aware of the height. It's kind of pulled out of the flow of things. And so it's kind of a quirky little fix that we have to do, but it is a thing. So we don't want this image to extend outside of the section. And so therefore we're going to do this little fix, this little quirky thing we have to do in order to make sure that the puppies stays, this picture stays inside of the section. And the same thing is happening with this guy. So here's what we're going to do. After each of these, I have this P tag with the class of clear. I have put clear floating. Let's do, I did them differently here for some reason, so we're going to do them both clear float because they're both going to get the same thing. So very important is that they're after, they're at the end of this whole section. So they're within the section, but they're at the end. And they both have this class of clear float. But notice what I put in here. There's no content in this paragraph tag. It's just, this is a blank, like a space, non-breaking space. So it's just a space, like if I hit the space bar. But there's no content in this paragraph. But what clear float is going to do is it's going to, let me just write it in here so we can see it. So I'm going to do class clear float. And what we're going to do is we're going to say clear both. And so the idea here is, let me just verify that it works, and it did. So the idea here is, and I know it's a little hard to explain, but hopefully I can make it make sense. The idea is we're creating an element inside this section. We're suggesting that if this particular element, if it's being asked to float around the image, which it was, because everything is going to float around that image, now we're saying this particular element, if it's receiving a float, erase the float. The float no longer applies. So push this thing to the next line, or wherever it would normally go if it wasn't being floated. That's what clear both says. So we're kind of forcing the issue by putting a paragraph in here, even though it doesn't have, you could put something in it if you want, but we don't have to. So the idea is I have an element that was being floated around the image. Now we're asking it not to float around the image because it now is no longer floating. The container, the browser is aware of it. I know this sounds strange, is aware of it. And so now it allows us to have that floated image contained within our section.